November 1941, an operating room in Washington. A 23-year-old woman lies awake on the table. Two doctors lean over her. One asks her to speak, to say a prayer, to count backward, to sing. And while she sings, the other cuts into her brain. How far they go, they measure by what still answers in her. Then her words fall apart. Only then do they stop. Just 3 years earlier, the same woman had stood before King George VI in a court. Presentation gown. How does a person get from there to this table? The world would later remember her in only one way: as the disabled sister, the daughter who couldn't keep up, the Kennedy they hid away in a home in Wisconsin, a family secret, a footnote in a glittering story. For decades, it was said she had been lost from birth. That label was not the whole truth. Maybe it says less about her and more about the people who needed it. So the question isn't whether the Kennedys were cursed. The harder question is a different one. Was Rosemary Kennedy really lost? Or was she made to be lost? And what had to disappear so a family could become a dynasty? Before she became the secret, she was a child who was slower than the others. Rose Marie Kennedy, born September 13, 1918. The third child, the first daughter. She was late to walk and to speak, and she read and wrote with difficulty. But behind that was a person. She kept a diary about dances, concerts, a visit to the White House. In 1938, while her father was ambassador in London, she was presented at court. She stood before King George VI and Queen Elizabeth. Letters survive from that time in a childlike hand. Proud of a new dress, thrilled to board a plane on her own. It is the voice of a young woman who took part in life. But she did not grow up in an ordinary family. She grew up in a project that turned children into candidates. Joseph Kennedy had a plan for his children, and that plan was about winning. Whoever was weak stood out, and failure was dangerous. The image had to stay clean, Catholic, rich, flawless. For the sons, it meant politics and power. For the daughters, beauty, discipline, and a good name. A daughter who couldn't keep up was no private problem in that order. She was a risk. And the closer the family came to power, the greater that risk grew. In 1940, Rosemary came back from England, and something had changed. She grew restless, irritable, at times violent. There were said to be outbursts, moments when she lashed out. She was placed in a convent near Washington. And here the father's real fear began. Not the fear that his daughter was suffering, the fear that she drew attention. It is said he feared she might become pregnant and damage the name. A daughter no one could control, in a family built on control. For this system, that was the first crack. Not in her, but in what the Kennedys had to sell to the public. What happened next was decided by a single man. Joseph Kennedy heard of a procedure meant to make difficult patients calm. A lobotomy. He went to the neurologist Walter Freeman and the surgeon James Watts. He insisted that all of it stay secret. His wife is said to have known nothing, and Rosemary was never asked. In November 1941, the doctors opened her skull. She was awake. Watts cut with an instrument that looked like a butter knife. Freeman had her speak and sing as he worked. By her words, they measured how far they could go. They stopped only when her voice fell apart. Afterward, Rosemary could no longer care for herself. She spoke only a few words and depended on others. In a few minutes, they had solved a problem by erasing a person. and now it showed how this family handled what it had done. Rosemary disappeared, first into a clinic in New York State, then into a home in Jefferson, Wisconsin. To the outside world, it was said, she was teaching disabled children in the Midwest. To her siblings, almost nothing was said. Some didn't even know for years where she was. Her father is said never to have visited her again. Her mother is said not to have seen her for 2 decades. The man who built a dynasty had only one answer to his own daughter: lock her away and stay silent. But she could not be erased completely. Rosemary lived on quietly in Wisconsin, cared for by nuns, and only late did one of her sisters bring her back. Eunice Kennedy was close to her. In 1962, she set up a summer camp for people with disabilities in her own backyard. Out of that camp, in 1968, came the Special Olympics. Later, a worldwide movement. For a long time, Eunice denied that Rosemary was the reason. Later, she admitted the connection had probably run deeper. The daughter cut out of the picture became the reason others were finally seen. But the secret did not hold forever. In 1960, John F. Kennedy stood on the verge of the presidency. The family was at the height of its power. And just then, the first sentence about it surfaced in a publication. A notice mentioned a disabled sister living in a home in Wisconsin. Suddenly, the family that had stayed silent for 20 years had to speak. The following year, Eunice told part of the story herself. They admitted that she existed, not what had been done to her. The highest price was paid by her. For over 60 years, Rosemary lived with the consequences of a decision others had made. But the real price was quieter. A whole life was cut out of the picture so the rest could shine. And here lies the real key. Years later, one of the 2 doctors said something that shifts everything. James Watts is said to have stated that, in his judgment, Rosemary had no intellectual disability, but a form of depression. If that is true, then the procedure was no desperate help for a hopeless child. Then it destroyed a woman far less lost than was later claimed. The verdict was that she had been beyond saving from birth. Maybe the truth was the reverse. She was not too weak for this family. She simply didn't fit an image that allowed no flaw. Today, Rosemary Kennedy lies in Brookline, Massachusetts, in the same ground as the family that had sent her away. She outlived most of them. The father who signed, the brothers who became legend. On the table in Washington, she had still been singing. Only when she fell silent did they stop.